Already know what it is, man. It's Mr. All Fact, man. Groove City Zone, right here from Cambridge, Maryland, man. Just tore the stage down, man. I'm CEO of All Fact Entertainment, and I do hip hop soul. You feel me? I did 40 shows in 10 states last year. Shout out to Smack. Shout out everybody, yo. Get plugged in. You heard me?
Good evening, good evening. I looked at the time, it's 8 o'clock, it's Wednesday. It must be time for food for thought. On this December 9th, 2020, 42 days before the inauguration of the 46th President of the United States, hopefully. Uh, Got a little different format we're going to go with tonight than usual. I haven't been with you for a couple weeks because of the holiday season and everything. And I'll be honest, I needed to decompress from what been going on uptime to the election and therefore after. But we put together tonight, what I put together tonight is a little combination. We want to talk about the Biden transition. We're going to deal with the cabinet choices and actually talk about a little bit about the negotiation for the relief bill that is desperately needed. Um, Most of everything of the CARES Act in March actually goes away at the end of the month, so it's going to leave a lot of citizens and destitute, if not homeless and hungry, and want to see what Congress is trying to do to help the people that need to be helped. And then at the end of that, we're going to I'm gonna go. My second segment is gonna go with segregation in America today. Um, I know usually we understand, segregation from the 1800s and up to the 1950s and 60s and things like that. But I want to actually explore that and where we are today with it and how does it affect us as black people on a daily basis and how we may not even realize it because it's so ingrained in the system and ingrained in our lives that we don't even know that we're currently still living in a state of segregation. But before we get to that, we want to deal with the Biden transition and the cabinet picks and stimulus. And I'm going to bring on my guest co-host, who actually probably runs the show more than me. I'm gonna bring my son Dallas. He's going to call in with me, and we're going to discuss these things. You there, buddy?
Yeah,
How we doing tonight?
we're just getting by.
Just getting by. That sound. You just sound like most of us in America, just getting by.
Yeah,
So, we want to start off. We want to talk about, well, obviously, the Biden transition has officially started about a week to 10 days ago, or something like that, by getting the GS to sign off on the paperwork. Um, but what I want to first touch on, which you had brought to my attention, is these court cases that still are going on trying to overthrow the election.
yeah. So the Trump campaign, they don't have too many left because most of their court cases have been thrown out, or they withdrew, or they just flat out lost. The only court case that they did win was in Pennsylvania, and that was over the Secretary of State extended the deadline for mailing voters to supply missing ID or like to fulfill the ID requirements on the ballot. The original date was November 9th, but they pushed it to the 12th, and the court in Pennsylvania announced that he was filing a lawsuit against the states of Georgia, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin, alleging that due to different circumstances, their results should just be thrown out. 17 states have joined in that lawsuit. The Trump campaign has expressed that they want to join, and they're asking the Supreme Court to allow the Trump campaign to join in that lawsuit, or Trump himself. So yeah, that's where we've been right now.
So wait a minute, you're saying
that's one big because that case is big because the Supreme Court now, only the Supreme Court can settle disputes between states. So Texas filing this lawsuit, against these states is important.
so you saying the Texas Attorney General is actually suing other states because of their election laws.
Yes, that's what they're. Yes, that's what they're alleging in the lawsuit. Now, whether they'll be successful in getting the court to hear this is another thing. But only the Supreme Court would be able to hear this case.
But okay, December 8th for our viewers, December 8th was a big day yesterday because December 8th was Safe Harbor Day, which was actually Safe Harbor means like basically the electoral college and their number, they're locked in. Nothing can be changed by December 8th. And
Yeah.
are they trying to actually hear this case before the electoral college is supposed to be drawn? The ballots are cast on the 14th, on Monday.
Uh-huh.
So they're trying to actually ram this case in beforehand or try to delay the electoral college.
So yeah, that's the goal. That's what they're trying to get them to do. That's why these 17 states joining in. So it's not just Texas. I mean, again, there's no. I mean, the Trump campaign has already tried to get certifications delayed.
Right.
They've already tried. They already tried all this. So this is just the latest attempt to do that. They're trying to get the Supreme Court to rule again, to invalidate their electoral votes. Well, I guess when they're cast, they're just the optics of this lawsuit. It's not gonna pass at all. No.
Well, we can leave it there, but I'm going to say this much. If the Supreme Court gets involved and actually invalidates people's lawful votes that's been certified by these separate states, then the legitimacy of the court is shot from this day forward. Because I don't feel as though citizens are going to actually want to follow the actual wording of the court from 9 people that do not get voted into office. They are appointed for life. And in all actuality, if they overthrow the will of the people, then they're setting themselves up for basically political and institutional assassination. Because no one would actually want to follow what they say ever again by actually throwing people's votes. But let's move on to the cabinet selections.
Okay.
Joe Biden's being lauded by a lot of news industries and everybody around for being rather the most diverse cabinet in history. His White House communications division is ran by all seven women. Several women are women of color. Cabinet positions is diverse with either first woman in a position or first Latino, and like the hold Secretary of Homeland Security who's Latino. Then Health and Human Services is also. What do you feel about how the cabinet's been going so far? Oh,
I would say I like some of the picks. For starters, not even a cabinet position, but it's for selection for chief I think that was a good pick, especially for now during the pandemic, because he led the Ebola response
Okay.
during the Obama administration. So I like that from the start. But then, I like the HHS pick. I like the Sarah. I like the. I don't know. There were picks that I liked and other picks. I mean, it comes from the same mold for the most part. These are like career, um, you know,
Washington Insiders.
institutionalists, yeah, the insiders, the neoliberals for the most part. They're I would say Janet Yellen isn't a bad pick. She subscribes to the Keynesian economic theory.
Okay,
Which is like
let me explain to the audience. Janet Yellen is nominated for the Secretary of the Treasury. Now she is a Keynesian economics. Now I'm gonna try and explain to you what that means. And in the main sense of with economics, she is what you would consider a progressive, somebody that thinks outside the box somewhat when it comes to financial institutions. The only thing that makes her basically a progressive is she believes that the Federal Reserve and the United States government, it is their job to actually pump money into the private sector and into the public sector to try to make things better. So, like when you talk about interest rates and giving out like waiving interest on small business loans and things like that, she's for those type of things. So she is more concerned about boosting the economy through Main Street by mom and pop stores, about me and you getting into business, than actually boosting the economy to giving more actual discounts and tax safe havens for the corporate class. So that is a and progressive in some ways that, but when you're talking about an economist, economists are basically conservative in nature anyway. And what we find with the Biden blueprint right now is he's basically getting a lot of people that whoever he knows personally or who's worked in the Clinton or Obama White House, who's career politicians or career Washington insiders, to kind of get back to normancy, and because of the fiasco over the last 4 years. Now, we have to have a wait and see approach to see if that's actually going to be better for me and you. And I'm skeptical if it's actually going to be better for me and you. But that's where, as though in some instances, we still had to hold his feet to the fire. And I told you this before the election. You can vote for them, but once whoever you vote for, you still got to hold their feet to the fire and still get the agenda that you like. What about, how do you feel about these other nominees? What's the controversy for the Secretary of Defense? It's that Lloyd Austin, the general,
yeah,
4-star general.
Austin Lloyd, yeah.
Okay, it was Austin Lloyd. Okay. Oh, now
Yeah.
what?
I was
It's Lloyd Austin,
okay.
and
Yeah,
he will
I
be
had a written down
he
for
be,
that.
right. He'll be the first. He will be the first black Secretary of Defense in America. But he is a former 4-star general in the Army, and he just retired in 2016. This is controversial. Why?
Well, it depends on if you're from a progressive standpoint or just anti-war and I guess military and having all this money spent on. He settled the border Raytheon previously, and they're one of the biggest beneficiaries from the Pentagon's $700 billion budget. So I think that's a red flag. But then also they want civilian like control
and he is a close. I'm not going to say a close personal friend, but he has a relationship with President-elect Biden throughout the years. So he basically picks somebody that he trusts, which is not so uncommon in this situation. But it puts Democrats in a bad situation because they didn't want to actually vote for General Mattis in the Trump administration because he hadn't been retired to 7 years. So they may actually have to go back on their word, and because this is going to be historic, and I think that's the reason why Biden is putting him up, so he can kind of try to push the envelope and see what he can get away with, in nominating these people. But a couple, what I want to actually get across to the audience is these are people that run our everyday lives, that are in charge of departments that actually deal with us, and you may not even know their name. You don't pay attention to it. But these positions are very important because they actually identify the direction that the administration is going towards. Like, who do you put in charge of HUD? Who do you put in charge of agriculture? Who's in part? Who's in? What type of person do you put in charge of the Justice Department? Because how you get criminal justice reform is based on who your attorney general is and what they try to direction they push the Justice Department. And what you said? What came out today? He's going to appoint former Doug Jones, former senator of Alabama. Okay, and how do you feel about the Doug Jones pick?
Um, so I feel like I don't think that'd be a bad pick. I think that he's another he's long career in justice and all that. He came from the Justice Department. I think that he just came from that. Like you said, he held the seat in Alabama, but he recently lost that. Some would say that that in a normal election, he probably wouldn't have won it in the first place when he was going up against Warren Moore.
Yes.
But nonetheless, but ultimately, like you had seen it coming. So I think this is a pick that a lot of people saw coming. It shouldn't surprise anybody if it gets announced.
But he should be a person that actually puts the Justice Department back together, whereas though we're not at, he won't work for the president. He actually prosecuted the Oklahoma City bombing case back in the 90s. Yeah, but that's something. And we said we got another historical pick today with Marcia Fudge.
Yeah, she's a representative from Ohio. She was lobbying to be the Secretary of Agriculture,
which I was
crazy because
I thought she should have been.
She basically said that black people usually only get labor or HUD, but she was personally lobbying to be the Secretary of Agriculture, but none of us got HUD.
Why is being the Secretary? First of all, let me explain to our viewers this, and I'm gonna be like, Secretary of Agriculture, for some reason, this is the problem with Democrats, and I'm gonna shit on Democrats right now. They always appoint a white man from a red state, a Republican state, to actually be the Secretary of Agriculture. And they do this for outreach because they think by doing this, they actually gave favor with voters in those states. And they never do. It's like they reach out to these people that are never going to vote for you. Then why bother? Put people in place in your cabinet that is going to help your agenda, not maybe get you some votes 4 years from now. Now, Marcia Fudge, who is from Ohio, she has been a big advocate for SNAP benefits. She's been a big advocate for reinvestment for black farmers and she's been an advocate for food and trying to devastate food deserts and actually get things working so whereas though they can eliminate poverty and food deserts. This is what she's worked for all the time that she's been in Congress. And instead of getting to the position that she's been pushing for, they gave her HUD secretary. Don't get me wrong. Housing and urban development is very important. And too bad fucking Ben Carson's been in charge for it the last 4 years, maybe, and they actually devastated many of the daggone housing development programs. So whereas though people couldn't get affordable housing for the last 4 years, hopefully she can actually do something to get that department back moving. But I was a little bit upset that she wasn't picked for agriculture. Also, did they
Yeah,
ask?
he put the Secretary of Agriculture under the Obama administration, Tom Vilsack.
He got Vilsack again?
Yeah.
You're kidding me. I'm
No.
sorry. I'm just learning this right now. This is real time. This is a real time reaction. Oh, you got to be kidding me.
Yeah.
And what?
The critics are actually saying that could be the former governor of Iowa.
The former governor of Iowa, like 20 years ago. This is what I'm holding the same position that he had 12 years ago. White male from a red state that happens to be a Democrat. All right, yeah, I'm over it. We need to pay attention to this going forward and see how these things prosper once the administration takes over, because I'm telling you, I'm on the fence 50-50. And don't get me wrong, nobody's ever happy with, designations, fully happy with a cabinet, everyone and everything like that. You're not gonna make everybody happy. But I already had the feeling, for me being a progressive, that progressives was going to get short-sighted and not get in the room and get prominent positions. And it just shapes up to what's going to be a possibility, whereas though progressives and people on the left are going to be fighting the Democrats again, like always, to move off of their middle of the ground positions. Let's talk about the stimulus. No, let's say it's not a stimulus. Let's say talk about the relief package negotiations. What they're trying to get done in the House and the Senate for the next COVID relief package. What's going on with that?
Yeah. Okay, I'll give him that one check, but I do want to say two picks I did like out of the cabinet.
Okay.
Was his pick for Homeland Security, in Mayorkas. He helped implement DACA under the Obama administration. So I do think that's a good pick. And then, as I said, Becerra for HHS, he's a Medicare for All supporter. So they're not progressive, but they do support progressive policies. So I think that's a silver lining to look for.
And they're both the first Latinos in those positions.
Yeah, so I think that I love those two picks. Those are good. But the stimulus negotiations. If you would have asked me a few days ago, I would have said they were definitely going to get a deal done. If you would have asked me now, I would say, who knows? It's up in the air. There's been so many different, updates and different things. The tide definitely started to change. A group of bipartisan senators, they released a $908 billion deal, and that included $300 in enhanced unemployment benefits, not retroactive back to when the original enhanced unemployment benefit ended, but just going forward for 16 weeks. They had no stimulus checks in it. It had some funding for state and local government, and some funding for education, and for transportation and all that stuff.
To actually retrofit the schools with PPE and like plastic shields and things of that nature, right?
Yeah. to make it so that that's like actually going like have an education, you know, not on in Zoom anymore, back in the schools.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and then Mitch McConnell, he had released another, one of his $500 skinny bills that he didn't really intend on getting passed. This one didn't include anything for unemployment, but it included money for corporations, for corporate liability. It didn't really include a lot of money for
Go
state and
into the
local
corporate
government.
liability. Explain to the viewers what do you mean by corporate liability.
Um, for instance, popular grocery chain in some parts of the country, they didn't allow for their employees to wear a mask for a while. And one of their employees, a 70-year-old who wasn't allowed to wear a mask, he caught COVID and he died, and now his family is suing over that. And if they were to get this corporate liability passed, the family wouldn't be able to sue the company, even though they put that worker in harm's way and they didn't set it up that his safety wasn't protected. So that's what that would strip away.
That's the corporate liability shield.
Yeah.
Let me explain to you in some detail what he's saying. If they put in this bill to pass a corporate liability shield, so whereas though if you got sick at work and your employer did not follow certain procedures and put you in harm's way and you specifically got sick from working there, you can't sue the employer. And on the same hence, whereas though if your employer is open back up and calls you back to work and you decline to go to work, you can't get unemployment. So it's a catch-22. But by this bill, if this bill was actually signed and put in law, basically it'd be the wild wild west, and your employer can have control and it put you in any type of situation at work, and you wouldn't have any ability to sue them for negligence and being liable for you getting sick, or like for instance, this particular family, their family member died. These are little things that they slip into bills that a lot of times you as the normal public and many of us say, well, am I getting my $600 extra a week? Am I getting my $1,200 stimulus check? Those are the optics that you pay attention to, but you don't actually read the details and to see how they actually may be screwing you somehow on the back end, because they know we in the public a lot of times are so desperate for help and relief that we would actually take a check that Donald Trump signs and believe that he actually gave it to us out of his pocket. That's how twisted some people are and ignorant to what the real society is. So the Democrats are holding firm, and they won't pass a bill that has this liability and shield in it.
No.
And a lot of people are saying, we don't care. We want the money. We need the money. We need the help now. But part of the bill doesn't even help evictions still. And it's on.
So they extend the eviction moratorium, which means like you just can't get evicted. But I mean, if there's no stimulus checks, or if there's no retroactive unemployment, I mean, people have been accruing a lot of debt, not just with rent, but I mean, people have been paying into utilities, or they're behind in utilities, they're behind on the credit card bills, on their car payments, or just whatever it is. It's behind all the bills. So if they did not have any stimulus checks, anything going forward, I mean, I'm not going to lose my house, but I mean, once the eviction moratorium is up, or in the pandemic's over, then what? I'm just going to be in debt, and I'm just supposed to go to work and then get my normal wage again, and then have to pay all this debt off, but also have to survive. Then, like, there's nothing. I mean, the White House, they proposed a deal which was $600 for stimulus, and a stimulus check, but no enhanced unemployment. So it's like you can have either $600 now, or if it's $300 a week going forward. And they said here $600 right now. Like these trade-offs, they don't make sense.
So basically, as usual, the working poor or the working class people are just screwed in this deal, and whatever deal it is,
Yeah.
pretty much. Exactly, exactly.
I would say the only I would there is bipartisan support for um, enhanced stimulus checks and unemployment to an extent. The stimulus checks, there's a lot of bipartisan support for that, but in terms of the unemployment, it's not. I think
The
they're going
three,
to get a deal done. How much it's going to be effective remains to be seen. Mitch McConnell said that he'll drop the corporate liability if the Democrats drop the state and local funding, which makes no sense because you're equating a corporate liability shield to firefighters, police officers, sanitation workers, and teachers being able to get paid. Like New York City is gonna fire 9,000 MTA workers and shut the service down by 1/3. Like that's gonna be devastating for a lot of people. But he wants the corporate liability. So he said, I'll drop it if you drop that. But again, it's not equal at all.
right? These people, what we gotta understand is these state and local governments, they need this revenue, and the reason why they need this revenue is because with businesses being shut down and when people actually with so many people being on an unemployment system, they're not getting their tax revenue like they were, so they're not taking in this money for these services. As so they need this state and local money from the federal government just to basically keep the trains, literally to keep the trains running, literally in New York. This is
Yeah,
what we
we're
do.
we're $15 billion. Yeah, $15 billion deficit. That's just here. You can't
$15 billion
deficit.
deficit.
So,
Yeah. So they are willing to trade corporations not being sued so they don't give firefighters and first responders and actually government, state and local government workers. They It's an atrocity.
yeah.
It's an atrocity, and I understand when a lot of us don't actually get in detail and actually don't look at all this because it's just nasty and disgusting when you think about it. But the government's a business too, and they run their business the way they want to, and it's always some trade off. And this actually segue to my actual big thing about the Georgia election. Well, I want to leave it. That's the last part I want to discuss with you, and I'm gonna let you go before I get into my other section. But let's talk about the Georgia election, the senatorial
Alrighty.
election. It's basically I'm looking at for everybody that don't know, which you should know, Georgia's having a runoff election on June 5th. Um, actually Monday.
January 5th.
Yeah, January. Ah, 2020, bud. 2020. I don't know what the hell's going on. January 5th, they're going to have a runoff, and basically the runoff is going to actually come to control of the Senate. We have the Republicans, Kelly Loeffler, who was appointed last year, and David Perdue, who's the incumbent, versus John Ossoff and Raphael Warnock, the Democrats. If anybody it control of the Senate goes there, because right now it's 50 Republicans and 48 Democrats.
Yeah.
So I don't see it being a split. I don't see people splitting their votes and it being 1-1. If that happens, wow. But if the two Democrats win, then we come to 50-50, and then Vice President-elect Kamala Harris would be the deciding vote. So Democrats would have majority in the Senate. And that'd be very important to see, especially moving forward on whatever type of COVID relief package will be put in place in the Congress after inauguration. Are we thinking that this is something small they're trying to do right now, and then something larger will be done if the Democrats take over in January?
So that's the thinking, but I that's the thinking behind the move. Like Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer, they're in favor of the $908 billion deal because they said, yeah, then we'll get one done when Biden comes in. But I mean, one, that's dependent on if you get these Senate seats, like you said, and two, well, that has always been the case. I mean, it's like we knew for it. There was overwhelming evidence. It was trend in the polls, and you could feel it in enthusiasm that Joe Biden was going to win the election. We knew this. We knew this like in September.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't understand why you had so many different proposals. You had a $1.8 trillion deal. You had a $1.4 trillion deal. You had deals that you could have made that would have helped a lot of people. It would have alleviated a lot of pain. And this goes to both sides because Mitch McConnell wants to drop the corporate liability now, but he didn't want to do it any months prior. But I mean, it's just you could have got a smaller deal before and then did something after the election. So to say that's still your plan, I mean, that's nothing has changed. You should have got something done before.
We already know they kicked everything in politics. They kick stuff down the can down the road until after the election, and that's how they wanted to play. Nobody wanted to put their name on anything before the election, and now they're only with by even just doing an extension for 18 weeks. What we talking about? We still only talking about into the what? Into March maybe.
Yeah.
The pandemic won't be over then, but we can go on for days and weeks. Going over that. We're gonna leave it there. Thanks for all the information, Dal. For coming on. I'm gonna move on to my other segment, but I appreciate the time and your insight.
Well, of course, anytime.
Yeah, take it easy, son. Okay. I'd like to thank Dallas for with y'all for coming on. He keeps me balanced with what's going on with certain things that I miss, and I always think it's actually a good thing to get some insight for somebody that's of another generation that's younger than you. So I like to know what the younger people are actually thinking, and it's a good way to actually keep contact with your kids when you have certain in common like that. But what I want to roll into my last segment, go over for a few moments. It's just here on Food for Thought. We like to give you some politics and some information for you to end, but also I like to think that this is like a classroom. So and try to deal with certain things that happen in to us in the black community historically and what's going on with us today. And one of the big things that I always wanted to cover when I started the show, and we just got jammed up in a lot of things, especially with being an election year. And I had to keep on pushing it back. But I wanted to go over segregation. And when we hear segregation, I know we think about the South and Jim Crow laws and separate but equal and segregated lunch counters and things of that nature. And those are all pivotal things that have happened to us in history. But one of the things that I wanted to go into is actually talk about how, surprisingly, if you don't realize, we basically live in a segregated state today. And I say we may not realize this because we just go on in life and we live where we live at and we live around the people that we live around and we don't actually identify with segregation in a sense because oh, I can go into any restaurant or any hotel and get seated, or they'll allow me to stay at the hotel, or I can go to any gas station, things like that, anywhere in the country, and just because my color of skin, they're gonna say no, you can't get any service. But in a lot of cases, we still can't live where we want to live, and there's a lot of factors to that that actually put it into that play, and that's what I want to get into. But how did we get here? And it goes back, and I'm gonna talk about the history for a quick minute, and then we're gonna go into now. But I want you to understand that as long as people that look like us have been in this country, we have been a, a chip. We have been a bartering chip in society. We have been a pawn. We have been leverage. We have been martyrs. And especially when it comes to the political process and the economic growth of this country, the free labor of slavery had always been in play until its abomination. It goes even back to the Missouri Compromise in 1820 or the Kansas-Nebraska Act in 1854. You have to realize when this country started actually bringing in new states, they had to actually negotiate and say, are you going to be a pro or anti-slavery state? And in many ways, when they brought one in, if they brought one that didn't have slavery, they had to allow one in that had slavery so it can be even. And this was the fight that they would often have, so in order to avoid civil war. This country had been on the brink of civil war for almost 50 years. As every time somebody would actually bring another state into the Union, the slavery issue would come up. I'm going to explain to you right now, which something that I just uncovered by doing the information for this particular show. How did we get segregation in America? And segregation in America, basically came in the Compromise of 1877. And you're probably saying, 1877. But the Compromise of 1877 actually launched segregation in this country for the next almost 100 years. And this was based on a presidential election in 1876. Samuel B. Tilden, who was governor of New York, was against Rutherford B Hayes. And for our historians that, or any people that had social studies in middle school, you probably know the name Rutherford B Hayes because you'd be like, oh, well, Rutherford B Hayes was president. Yes, he was. The former governor of Ohio was president, but he only became president because of a negotiation. Tilden of New York actually won more electoral votes. He won by one electoral vote. He was a Democrat. Now, don't get me wrong. Democrats then were the Republicans now, and Republicans then are Democrats now. Okay? To a certain extent. Republicans, of course, said, does this sound familiar? The Democrats had voter fraud. They contested that in 3 states, Louisiana, Florida, and South Carolina, the Democrats intimidated and suppressed African American votes in those states. So whereas though they would win those states and win those electoral votes. What it came about was they got a bipartisan commission of 5 U.S. representatives and 5 Supreme Court justices to come and figure out this issue and negotiate who should be the president in a backroom deal. And what they came about was this. The Democrats said Rutherford B Hayes can be president as long as the government pulled all federal troops out of southern states. Because of Reconstruction and actually trying to get black people on equal footing in America, federal troops were in southern states to follow the law and make sure people followed the law. Democrats said, pull the federal troops out and we will honor the Constitution and the amendments and we will give African Americans fair citizenship in our states. Okay, 2 months later, federal troops were taken out of the South. After that, the Southern Democrats reneged on the deal and passed all type of segregation laws and Jim Crow laws to revert back to prior Reconstruction, and they came up with separate but equal, which was never equal. So, by negotiating who would be president in 1877, launched segregation in this country until 1964, by law. Once we got, the Voting Rights Act and things of that nature, and then in 1968 we had the Fair Housing Act, and the Fair Housing Act basically says nobody can be discriminated by sex, race, national origin, or anything like that. So everything's fair, right? Right? No, not right. Right now in this country, we have tens of dozens of segregated cities and towns. And you know this because a lot of us live in it. A lot of us live in it. A lot of them was brought up in it, and you may not even know. And it's so crazy to think about because, like, I have a list of the top 25. And 5 of the top 25 are in Louisiana. 3 of the top 25 are in Georgia. And another 3 of the top 25 are in South Carolina. Yeah, Mississippi. Alabama. I'm sorry, another 3 is in Alabama. Whereas though high populations of the black community is actually concentrated in small, dense places. And it actually overpowers the total national average of how many black people we have in the country. We had like 12.7%. But when you look at some of these statistics, it's either double or triple the amount of people that are in these places. And it actually hit me to an extent because, all right, tell you a little story for people that don't know and people that probably that might know. I was born and raised in Camden, New Jersey. Camden, New Jersey is a small little 8 square mile little city in New Jersey right next to Philadelphia. Many times when I say I'm from New Jersey, people they ask if I'm from North Jersey and why don't I have the accent and why don't sound like Tony Soprano. Tried to explain to them a lot of times, Garden State is kind of bigger than what you think it is, and we all not from North Jersey. No, we all not from Patterson. We not from Orange. We ain't from Newark. And that was another thing I had to learn actually when I moved to Delaware, because Delaware has a Newark, but I'm from Jersey and we Newark. We didn't do the arc. We said Newark. But Camden is considered one of the top 25 regions that is highly segregated. The Philadelphia, Camden, and Wilmington area is 25 on the list as highly segregated in the country. And you're saying, what differences does this make when you come to being segregated? Well, in a lot of cases, because of housing discrimination and redlining, and you can look up redlining because redlining is basically the practice of refusing to give insurance or loans to someone who actually are deemed living into a potentially poor and hazardous area. Now, they have a committee that does this and looks at these different cities and the different counties and says if they are hazardous or not. And basically, 74% of the cities and towns that are in this category are low income, and 64% are people, or 64% of that are people, majority people of color live in those. And so you're in an area where as though even if you buy a home, the equity of that home is not, you're not, it's not worth anything. So whereas though when you live in these red line districts, in these houses, whereas though it's particularly segregated and it's low income or to moderate income, you not having any type of generational wealth because you may own this home, but it's not worth anything. It's not worth, and not to mention, just like when you get insurance for a car and you're younger, and when you tell them you live in a city instead of living in like a rural area, the insurance for that is more. The same thing for black people and people of color when they try to get insurance rates and actual interest rates and loans for their homes, it's more than their white counterparts that are in what they consider better areas. I can remember when my grandparents moved to, they lived in Camden, they was just moving to Pennsauken to finally going to get a house that wasn't a row home, that had a little front yard and a little backyard and was a little separated. And I can remember that at the time, they couldn't get a home that they were looking for on the other side of Route 130. Route 130 was a highway that ran, but you could get the house. They wound up getting a house that was on the Camden side of the highway, whereas though people that look like me could actually get the house on that side of town. It was harder to get a house on the other side of the highway. And this, don't make it no mistake. If you pay attention to where housing is in a lot of cities, highways, bridges, a lot of times they separate the black and the white neighborhoods. They separate them by the high, and don't get me wrong, yeah, it has changed a lot over the years. Whereas though many of us can get onto the other side of the highway, but in a lot of cases, we have to stay here. And a lot of that now has to do with our financial status. You are actually priced out from moving to the other side of the highway. And I'm trying to explain to you, this is happening today. And if you want to live a certain place if you want to live near your people and you comfortable living in a certain, more power to you. But what I'm trying to explain to you is through segregation and through redlining practices and basically illegal practices that have been going on in society, it pushes us into bad situations. And often when we live in these neighborhoods, the poverty rate is higher. The population, all right, like for instance, example, right here, Philadelphia, Wilmington, Camden. Okay? Black population in these neighborhoods is 30%. We're only 12% of the national. Okay? Black population, um, 21% in black neighborhoods is 30%. But overall in Philadelphia, Camden, and Wilmington is 21%, about 1.3 million people. The black poverty rate in these areas is 23.5%. Almost 300,000 people are living in poverty in this area, comparative to the white poverty rate, which is only 6.9%. So we basically quadruple the percentage of people that are in poverty in the same area that we live in. And this is true throughout these cities and towns because we live still in pockets. And you have to realize this because you are what? You hear around the country, wherever, Chinatown, Koreatown. Uh, Shoot, when I lived in Camden, there was two little pockets of what we had white Fairview, where it was white people in the little pocket. Then we had this little town that was called Woodland, which was basically really part of Camden, but they basically wanted to be different because they were white. They didn't want to be considered Camden anymore, so they got their own little mayor and their own little police thing. And for their 7 or 8 blocks that was in the city was Woodland. Um, but these things are going on today, and they have been, and we don't realize how there's, especially like for instance in the metro Atlanta area. Atlanta is one of the most segregated. Atlanta, Georgia is like one of the most segregated cities in the country when you put it together with Sandy Springs and Roswell. They say it's like 22nd, but trust me, and people that watch this that's in my family and that's from like the metro area has become more diverse over the last 10 or 15 years with a lot of people moving in, but structurally it's the city has been designed by the, and when I say design, in a lot of cities like specific Atlanta, their transportation system is set up whereas though when you get on a bus you can't get to right areas. You can't get there. That was one of the big things about when the Atlanta Braves moved to Cobb County. Um, it was like people from the city was like, we can't get there, and basically the Atlanta Braves was saying, yeah, but you know what? We don't want you there anyway. Our clientele's in Cobb County, but we don't want you to be able to get to the buses and actually be able to get in our town and things of that nature. And this is how systems are set up. I mean, think going through this list, uh, Baton Rouge, Louisiana, Macon, Georgia, St. Louis, Missouri, Flint, Michigan. Now we all know Flint, Michigan is 18 on the list. Now we all know about what happened in Flint, Michigan some time ago, back in 2014, and literally, Flint made a decision to try to save money, and so they wanted stopped taking their water supply from Detroit, and actually wanted to use their own reservoirs, and actually, that's what the problem is. And let me explain. In 2014, the city of Flint switched its water source from Detroit to Flint River in order to reduce a budget shortfall. The Environmental Protection Agency quickly confirmed the presence of dangerous levels of lead in the water, which likely led to about a 400% spike in pneumonia deaths that year and a slew of other negative health outcomes. Some have used Flint water crisis as examples of environmental racism in a term coined in the 1980s that described situations in which black Americans are disproportionately exposed to higher levels of pollution. And this does happen, especially in somewhat rural areas. That's where, look, let's pay attention. Where do trash plants go into? Where does these prisons go to? Where do the prisons go to? In these facilities. Majority of the time, these plants that are burning some type of pollution, or these trashed facilities, or these prison systems, they're always put in minority communities, because half the time in affluent white communities, they fight and say they don't want them. What they tell us is, what's the first thing they tell us? It's going to give you jobs. If this specific plant is there, or if the prison is here, it's going to bring jobs to the community. And they sell you that carrot. But they don't actually tell you that you're selling your soul for a buck, and it actually can actually be detrimental down the line, because you're in a catch 22. Segregation is not just putting people of the same color together, and it actually puts us nowadays, people that are in the same class, people that make the same amount of money. Look, if you live next to somebody, 9 times out of 10, y'all make the same amount of money within 10, 15, $20,000. That's how y'all both afford to live in that neighborhood. So it's more of a, but when you live in these depressed areas that have been redlined and that have been depressed for so, because what happens if it's a red line? Investors don't invest. People not putting malls and strip malls and putting businesses in your community. So your property value is not going up. Here in Middletown, in Delaware, I could imagine property values over the last 20 years have risen greatly, because this has basically been, it was a cow and manure pastures. Basically, no real people really lived out here, small amount, and they ain't had no businesses. Over the last 20 years, 15, 10 years, you have every restaurant chain, every Verizon, Sprint, movie theaters, laser tags. You got a Walmart, a Kohl's, a Amazon distribution center, all in this 15-mile little square radius, and then its housing is bubbling up and this, that, and other. This is an example of not being considered redline. This is a booming community, because somebody said, hey, we can put stuff there, and then investors come. Because look, I'm gonna tell you like this: when you go to a place and you got your McDonald's, you got your Hardee's, you got your Wendy's, you got your Red Lobster, you got your every Olive Garden, you got every national chain of restaurant, and then you got even the secondary, and then you have 4, 5, 6 different grocery stores all in one town, and then everything's a strip mall. That's somewhere you want to live, in the sense of whereas though your property value is going to go up because it's booming. Especially if you get in early before these things start developing. But on the flip side to that, and I'm well, let me stay. And not to mention when I'm talking about in Middletown, you have the best school district in the state and one of the best school districts in America. Why? Tax revenue. Affluent people living in the neighborhood where the median income is well over $57,000 a year. So whereas though the tax revenue actually in this little quote unquote segregated area, and I'm going to say it's segregated and not by color, it's diverse. It's a high percentage of white people, but it's plenty of black and brown people, plenty of people, Latinos, and I see plenty of Asian people and things. But they're segregated because they're financially segregated. Everybody basically makes the same amount, and mostly the median income is close to $60,000 a year. So they actually can afford these things to have a good school system, to have a pretty good transportation, to have a police department, and to feel safe. And people thrive from coming here. The same thing happens the opposite, when you in an area where as though you are pushed, when you pushed into a area where as though there's redlining and you are a risk if you come from Camden, if you come from North Philly, if you come from Newark, New Jersey, if you come from East St. Louis, Mobile, Alabama, if you from Zone 6 in Atlanta, okay? I mean, let's get down and grit. I'm just saying, you from Baton Rouge, you from Detroit, you from Jackson, Mississippi. Education is lower. Health choices in your community is lower. You find yourself in food deserts because basically your area has been deemed and actually been condemned before you even been born. The only way those areas can come back if you actually get investments in it from some white people probably with some money. Unless some black people actually want to come back home and do something for their community, but it has to be on a big scale because you already deemed as being in either a drug infested area. You're not going to get loans that you need for businesses, and it's not a great quality of life in certain areas, and it's actually been put onto you by the system in segregation. Because when a lot of times when people in business, they look at paperwork, they look at a dollar amount, and they say, listen, we can't make no money there because it's going to cost you X amount of money to insure everything, and then it's no profit. What's been happening over the last 10 years, though? Y'all know what gentrification is? Gentrification is basically when they take these urban areas and white folks start to move back in. I see it everywhere. I mean, before the pandemic, I would go places, and if you've been around the country, I mean, I made this observation with a friend the other day. Baltimore looked like D.C. Baltimore looked like Philly. Philly looked like Newark. Bronx, Queens looked like Camden. These places look like Richmond, Virginia in certain part of it. When you go to a quote unquote hood, or an urban setting, they all look the same. In some part, that's why I feel like I'm at home wherever. When I'm ever in the city, I feel at home because I know, you know, it's a stereotypical thing, but it's somewhat true. I see the corner store, I see the liquor store, I see the church, I see a police station, I see somebody on the street corner begging for money. Is it stereotypical? Yeah, but a lot of times stereotypes is true in their essence. And I think we actually fooling ourselves if we believe segregation is over. It's not. And if we choose to be segregated or not, it's not always our choice. But segregation in America in 2020 is still affecting us as black people. It's still affecting us. And we need to take a look at that when we talk about living the American dream. You can make the best of your situation, but always remember in some aspects, the system still keeps you in your box. And if you poor, or you the working poor, you always behind the eighth ball. And it's set up that way. Last thing about that, because I went over, I've been running, and y'all ain't talked to me in a couple of weeks, so. Poverty statistics. And this is actually, this is where I want to hit you at home, seriously. Black poverty, based on the census of this year, 2019, poverty in America for black poverty is at 18.8%. So 18.8% of the 30 some odd million black people in America are living in poverty. Don't let numbers persuade you to believe any certain thing other than the facts. Your president would say that poverty is down at the lowest that it's ever been in the history of America. And your president, for once, would actually be telling you the truth. Because they start taking poverty statistics in 1959. Since 1959, black poverty was lowest in 2018 at 20.8%. So still, you can say poverty for black folk is down the lowest this has ever been. Or you can still say, over 6 million people of color, black people, are in poverty. 20%. So 1 out of 5 black people are living in poverty. Although that is the lowest that it's ever been. See, numbers never lie. People can make the words sound like the numbers are better. Better, but you're still horrible. Hispanics. Now compare it. Black poverty to Hispanics. Hispanics was at the lowest in 2019 also, at 15.7%. Down from 2018, which were their lowest, at 17.6% of their population. You can say that and be like, woo, that's wonderful. But you still could say 8 million Hispanics are in poverty. And that's a large number. Asians was at 7.3% in 2019. Non-Hispanic whites, non-Hispanic whites was at 7.3%. So, Yeah, you're doing better, slightly, but we're still in distress. And these are the national numbers. They're not comparative to the 20 some odd percent or the 43% that are in these actual black communities, these 25 cities. You get a chance, you just Google it, look it up. Look up the list of the 25 cities that are most segregated cities and look at their black population and look at the poverty rates in those cities. And you'll be surprised. Just to finish, the top five were Memphis, Tennessee, Chicago, Illinois, when we already know how segregated Chicago is. North side, south side of Chicago. Albany, Georgia is number three. Number two is Detroit, Michigan. And number one was Pine Bluff, Arkansas. But take a look at these cities in your spare time and see and check how their school systems are run. They talk about their poverty rates, talk about the food deserts and things like that. The misconception that I want to leave you with is that when we should overcome and all those things in the 60s, we still living in those days today. It's just cosmetically different because you can sit at the lunch counter and you can get a hotel room, but we still not getting the same respect when it comes to housing, schooling, education, health, and food security. We segregated just as much as Jim Crow. And with that said, I'm gonna end this because we done extended and I've been talking too long and I'm pretty sure you're tired of me. But I'd like to thank you and moving forward, we got a lot of interesting shows coming up in the near future. I'm gonna go now that the election is quote unquote over. I'm gonna try to dig more deep into more cultural things and opportunities to actually help the black community and what we need to be looking for on the side of politics, because politics come into play when we need to negotiate for things that we want, but I want to go more deep in the concept of things that are affecting us on a day-to-day basis. And I think it's going to be an interesting journey in 2021. But until next time, thank you and class dismissed.